It's a large, almost 4-story high Danish design, I'll call it. And you notice these larger buildings, they may have been built at a later time than these homes that I'm walking by. Love that blue, and I like those large windows. It looks like an old Kaiser. It's possible that's a wealthy person's large home. Certainly it wouldn't be out of character. Some of these are quite large, even though their style is that of the smaller ones. So this interpretive sign confirms what I was thinking a moment ago, and that is that the large houses to our right as we were walking along are built on landfill, formed by manually shifting soil from the slope opposite. That would be this slope up here. But you'll notice again how much of a breakwater these walls are. The first dwellings here were in 1827 and 1835, both built of turf. Around 1850, the fashion for timber houses arrived, giving rise to this row of houses along the left side here. This veranda was apparently built so that people could use it as a walkway or as a pavement. If that's what's meant as a veranda, doesn't make much sense, really. This is the veranda. This yellow building used to be the town hospital. And the earliest 2-story house, although it looks 3 stories to me. Merchant Goodman gifted the building to the town as a hospital, and on Wednesdays people could book a shower. Here's the southern boundary of old Akureyri, where the first residential home was built in 1778. It burned to the ground in 1901. Damn. And replaced by number 3 on the street. We can see an old picture from 1920 of the yellow house, with a view of the harbor in its day. This was the site of the early home, apparently. This was a very beautiful home in its own right. Probably the prettiest old home that I've seen in my travels in this country so far. Notice here a ladder for escaping from the 2nd floor, but I'd sure as hell love to see how many people in that family have ever gone down that ladder. This is more the classic design and what's the house I thought they were actually referring to, but apparently not. So hold the phone. This is one of the early homes. And right where I'm standing right now is the shoreline, or was. So the shore was to our left. Now, of course, all of this has been filled in, I'm sure not manually. It suggests that that pond we were looking at did not exist in these days. And this was the ideal location for the merchants, because in those days they did not have piers. And so all cargo had to be unloaded into small boats and then ferried to the shore. Picture of generally where we're standing, or at least the shoreline off to the left there, 1896, excuse me. Another picture of the shoreline, but with a pier, it looks like. It's all in Danish. So this was 1890. It was the first house to be renovated to its original form, and that was in 1979. Looking farther down the street in the direction I was traveling are 2 large homes, or buildings at least. I don't know if they're homes or not. They were also added, I'm sure, to landfill. This path that I've just walked up used to be called Broadway. In those days, a relatively modest distance of today would be considered quite extravagant. This is apparently what it looked like. It's interesting to look at the storm doors of Goodman's 1835 to be hospital. Still a very pretty building, isn't it? Remember, we're walking right along the shoreline right now. So it looks like this metal underneath has been painted in the past, unless whatever paint was put on it originally is just now beginning to flake off. This may be the simple house of one of Iceland's favorite literary notables. Looks like an impressive building for a museum, a town this size. course, it's guarded by one of Iceland's saga characters. Interesting, these cannon were made by the Swede for the Danish army in 1864 in their war against the Germans over some piece of property. These were sold to Iceland in 1925 as bollards in which ships could be secured in the Akureyri port. This garden of the museum was the first place in Iceland to begin to nursery trees that were imported. So it's perhaps from here that several of the forest-like areas that I've seen had their origin. Having spent the evening parked in front of that yellow van just next to the museum, wake up after a night of great rain and yesterday afternoon of great rain to a glorious Iceland morning. And I think I'll take a walk around the pond. Here, a look down the man-made pond and all the land that's been added for these homes over time. This is a nice example of some design in cement, so they don't have to be as ugly as most are. This is the first map, 1547, that the museum has in its collection of Iceland. Not a bad map considering how convoluted the coastline is, like West Fjords. This is a little bit warped here. Probably a lot of it is. This one from 1771 seems even more curious. This is not the scale, I don't think. That's too elongated, but it's interesting how perceptions and why perceptions change over time. You would think accuracy would be the continuing path, greater accuracy. And sometimes old maps contain monsters, because oftentimes the people who wrote the maps had never even visited here. And this was the era of superstitions about places that people had never been, and particularly the vast ocean distances. Here, a perfect example of a map that has no relevance in 1566 to reality, developed by a person who may have visited and was trying to recreate from memory, or people who had no visiting here. This is one that lasted for 120 years as the most popular of maps until 1700s. And it has a group of islands here that have never existed, but a very pretty map. This one also from 1570 represents the imagination of map makers who'd never visited any place. This is probably something like Greenland, but who knows for sure. You'd have to assume this is the North Pole up here. Look at the various kinds of creatures here. Another up here. And another. The most recent in the collection here of maps is the 1800. And these are more accurate, better detail, but still do not reflect Iceland apparently as it is. A real surprise when you consider how much effort it would take to map the intricate coastline by the methods available then for navigation by boat. You couldn't do it by land, not very easily. Notice the difference between these two maps, both from relatively similar time period, 1734. And then I'll swing over to this one, which was 1800, so 66 years later. Around the 1850s, remember the book Heyday, the expeditions were made for the sole purpose of mapping accurately Iceland for navigation routes as well as location of harbors, which could be darn critical, as you've seen from the rest of my videos. This looks like it's designed to, and it's the first time I've seen, I think, a representation of a map in this format, but to show what the effect of curvature is on shape. I can't be sure that's what it does. It also reflects the time when finally the countries of the world quit using their capitals as the prime meridians for navigation and agreed on Greenwich, England. Of course, England had the power at that time. What a sextant when I had a sailboat, never did figure it out. Apparently a theater of geography. Exactly how it was used, I don't know. It certainly looks rather homemade, and perhaps was. And these are depictions by artists, I'm sure, of the various monsters one might encounter in the oceans as seen in the maps themselves. This map depicting exactly that, and I'll get in close so you can see it. Even here, probably polar bears and various other ice floe imagined animals. Certainly, one wonders why one would become a sailor if you saw these maps first. It's interesting, it looks like a telescope on a cane.